So tonight I'm going to be talking about the server-side rendered React framework called NextJS. I'll give you just a brief explanation about server-side and client-side rendering just to make sure you're all on the same page. And this will also help us understand why we should use server-side rendering. And obviously there are a lot of different server-side and client-side frameworks, but we've chosen NextJS and I'm going to hopefully show you why. So just a brief introduction about myself. I'm a software engineer and I work for a company called Tarati. I'm one of the founding members and we started the company at the beginning of this year. And one of the great things about starting a company is that you get to choose the technology that you want to use, which is really exciting. So I studied at WITS and I finished my engineering degree at the end of last year. So to get started, I'll just give you a brief overview of what Next is. So it's fundamentally a React framework, and then you add some Spice and some server-side rendering magic, and then you end up with NextJS. That's the gist of it. And so what this really means is that NextJS is a pure server-side rendering framework that's built for React. So this is hopefully, now we can go look at some of the things that clear up the difference between server-side and client-side, some of the rendering and what it means and how it impacts our performance. So in the first scenario, we're going to look at some client-side rendering. So what happens is the user first sends a request to the website, it just returns it saying, hey, listen, I'm here, and then downloads all the JavaScript that they need from the server, and then the page begins to render. And once all of this is complete, the user can eventually see the page. And what's interesting over here is that something only really happens with the user at the very last stage. So there's the majority of these steps, the user doesn't know what's happening and they're just waiting for something to happen. So if we take a little bit more of a technical view of what's happening, there are a number of things to consider. So we've got one of the main things is obviously distance between the two devices, the physical distance. This is important because the number of back and forth transactions means increase of waste time and the user just waiting for things to happen. So we primarily use AWS and we have a data center out in Frankfurt, which is about 8,700 kilometers away, and so yeah, it's not exactly across the road. So it's something that definitely needs to be considered. So we can see from a client-side rendering perspective, the browser will send a request to the server, and the server will respond back with an empty HTML document. The browser will then request the rest of the data, which then is sent back over that channel. And then only at this point can the rendering actually start. So a lot of stuff has had to happen before we can get to a point where we can start making our page. Now when you look at server-side rendering, it's a bit different. So in this case, the server's already performed all of the processing and operations that need to happen to generate the HTML page, and so it sends it straight to the browser. And now when the browser receives it now, it's completely viewable. So the user gets presented with a page that they can see straight away. After that, the rest of the JavaScript is downloaded, and once it's downloaded, it becomes interactable. So now the user can interact with your page. And so what's great about this is that right from the beginning, the user can see the page, they're getting something, and they can basically experience what your content's about. So if we do the same thing and we look at the timing diagram, the browser makes a request, and it immediately runs all the computations and then sends it back, the rendered HTML back to your browser so that you can see it already. And there we are, we can see it. So what is important to note here is where the computation is happening. So all the computation is done on the server side with high performance servers, which is great because if you compute it on the user's device, you don't know what they're using. So they could be using something great or something useless, and that's something it's an important variable that it would be great if you could control. And so that's why server-side rendering is a really good step to take if you're looking for performance-wise. So I think after this we can kind of agree that the performance makes sense to be better using server-side rendering, and this means that also the user gets a better experience because they're not waiting 6 years for their page to arrive. And also you're not hindered by, obviously, the user device's performance. So if you're not hindered by the device, it's from an engineering point of view, that's quite a nice variable to control. So now if we take a look at the framework themselves. So I mentioned earlier that NextJS is a React framework, so you get all the benefits of React. Obviously, it's a component-based framework, which is great. It has a nice tree-based virtual DOM, which makes rendering components separately really great. It has a flexibility of being client-side or server-side. It's usually opted for client-side rendering because of the independent loading that just happens at the same time. Like if you look on Facebook, you'll see that your news feed and your chat feed will update simultaneously, is because they're independent, and that's the brilliance of the component-based nature. Yeah, so then with any framework, there are their downsides. I just need to go back. Bit of a mission. Okay, well, I'll just talk you through it. It doesn't want to go back. So from the downside of React is that there's a long. Now we're all going all the way wrong ways. Okay, over here. Let's start there. So from React, there's a lot of painful times for developers. There's a lot of setup time, and for us, it doesn't really particularly work because we're trying to optimize our turnaround time. So any time that we're spending setting up is just wasting our money. So also from the digital marketing and digital awareness front, having something on the client side you struggle with it with SEO because of when the web crawlers come through, you don't actually have HTML to crawl through. You've got JavaScript files. So the only really company and facility that's really doing it is Google, which they'll search through some of your JavaScript files to find your content so that you can get better ranked on or index better. So NextJS should be an improvement on React, and at least in some of the cases. Otherwise, I've just wasted a whole lot of bunch of your time. So when dealing with NextJS, the one thing that jumps out is just simplicity. It's absolutely simple. You can literally get a project up and running in 5 minutes. It's one npm install, you create a directory, you create a JavaScript file, and you're good to go. You're absolutely away for the way, and you can start building right then and there. So that takes care of a lot of the time that you spend on React. It deals with that issue. Also, your routing is taken care of. The way you structure your directory of your pages determines how your routing works. So you create an index page, you want to create another subdirectory, you do it, add another JavaScript file in, and it's done. You don't need to worry about it whatsoever. It takes care of your code splitting so that all the imports of your JavaScript files are bundled together in the page, and you're not loading any pages that any code that you don't need. So the main point is obviously the server-side rendering part. That is the golden ticket of NextJS. So you get that superior performance because you're handling the computation yourself, and you're not trusting the user's devices to do it for you. It's obviously discoverable because all your HTML is already pre-rendered on your server, so the web crawlers can find it, and then your indexing just becomes a lot better. And then so your visibility on search engines and social media platforms is a lot higher. So it's got fast delivery, so Next prefetches the initial data, builds a page on the server, and it drastically reduces the number of calls between the user and the backend. So that means that you're saving on latency and you're saving on bandwidth, because obviously making less calls, it uses less bandwidth, you use less bandwidth as well. It also has this beautiful feature of exporting your code to a static app, which is great. It builds all the HTML for you beforehand, and then you just simply upload it. So we've used this a number of times, and it works wonderfully. It's super simple. We just host it on an Amazon S3 bucket, and you're good to go. And it's done. Yeah. There's also an option to create a custom server if you want to, and your own routing, so you have that extra flexibility in case you want it. So there are some more interesting features about Next, is that you have the ability to create progressive web apps, and has done all for you. It handles all the heavy lifting for you. So you can do offline support, fast navigation, native features, push notifications, install to your home screen. All of that, you can do it. It can be done for you. You just configure their ways, and it's a couple of lines of code, and you're done. It's super simple. There's also a feature where you can create AMP pages. You basically harness the power of React, and you can create super fast pages within the restrictions of AMP. And by doing so, you are creating mobile-first applications straight away. So when it comes to Next, the biggest thing it's doing and the biggest thing it's handling for you is all the heavy lifting, so that you can get straight into being productive, and that you only need to focus on building the actual product. So you're not wasting time on small things like setting up costs. All that kind of stuff is taken for you. So to be entirely honest, a lot of you have probably got a lot more experience than I do. I've only been doing this for 8 months. And what's good about Next is that it takes care of a lot of things so that I don't have to do it. And that's pretty great. And then you don't have to take my word for it. These are a couple of companies that are using Next at the moment. And there's reason to use it. Yeah. So if there's any questions, yeah, yes.